This actually happened. Tonight I'm going to be telling you 5 stories that sound completely impossible. A road outside San Jose people were warned not to stop on, a house that kept growing for decades, a lake hiding an entire lost landscape, a 17-year-old girl who fell nearly 10,000 feet from an airplane and lived, and a ship found drifting across the Atlantic with everything still on board except the people. If you don't know me, I'm Jack Mercer. You can call me Jack. These are all true stories, real mysteries, legends people still talk about today. The road you're not supposed to stop on. San Jose, California. If you grew up around San Jose, there's a road you may have heard of a long time before you ever drove it. Hicks Road. During the day, it's a road through the hills south of San Jose. Nothing about that sounds particularly terrifying, but generations of teenagers around the area have passed around a very different version of Hicks Road. And the warning is always some variation of the same thing. Don't go too far. Because according to the legend, somewhere back in those hills are people who do not want you there. And this isn't something the internet has created or someone invented last year. Versions of this story have been passed around locally for years, and they've actually ended up in USC's digital folklore archives. One San Jose area student described Hicks Road as something teenagers would go out and brave. Another remembered being warned that if you reach the wrong part of the road, you should turn around. And another version goes much further. It says if you cross into the wrong property, you may not be coming back. Now imagine hearing that when you are with your friends. You're 16, you're 17, and you hear, it's late. Somebody says, let's go to Hicks Road, and immediately everyone has a decision to make. Because nobody wants to be the one who says, absolutely not. So you go. At first, nothing happens, and that's almost worse. You're waiting for something. Every turn feels like maybe this is the turn. Everybody was talking about it. Every house looks more suspicious because somebody already told you there was something suspicious out there. But that's the thing about it. Every person you see becomes part of that story, and the further you go, the harder it becomes to remember which parts you've actually seen and which parts you were told you'd see. Because this is where the Hicks Road legend gets bizarre. There isn't one version, there's several. One says there's an isolated group living near the end of the road. Another says outsiders aren't welcome. Another version collected by USC says that they're armed. And one of the strangest San Jose versions turns them into something almost supernatural. Blood-sucking people living somewhere in the hills. That's an actual version of the folklore collected from someone who grew up in Almaden. And here's what makes that account so good. The interviewer asked her, do people actually die there? And essentially she said no. Everybody goes there, everybody comes back. But imagine this. That might be the entire secret of Hicks Road. You don't have to find anything. You go there already expecting to find it. Think about that. You're driving somewhere completely unfamiliar at night. You've been told for years that something waits at the end. Suddenly your brain becomes a threat detection machine. Was that something standing over there? Was that house always there? Why did that car turn around behind us? Why is everyone suddenly quiet? And now something completely ordinary becomes evidence that the story was true. You know, it's midnight. Are you getting that car? Because apparently many San Jose teenagers did. And that's why folklorists describe Hicks Road as something almost like a legend quest. You don't just hear the story, you test it. You drive out there because you want to be able to come back and say, I conquered Hicks Road. But now comes my favorite part. Where did this story come from? And the answer is nobody really knows. But one account preserved by USC contained a ridiculously simple possible origin. The person telling the story remembered hearing that years earlier, some young people had been somewhere around Hicks Road when they encountered a man. They were already nervous, possibly somewhere they shouldn't have been. They ran. And when they later describe the person they see, something's apparently described him as very white. That's it. Not a monster, not an army, one man, very, very white. Then the story gets told again and again and again. Maybe very white becomes albino. One person becomes a family becomes a community, somebody adds weapons, somebody else adds blood sucking, and eventually you don't just have a weird encounter anymore, you have Hicks Road. Now, can anyone prove that's how the legend started? No. Even that origin story is part of the folklore, and that's what makes this so weird. We've reached the point of the explanation for this legend that itself becomes a legend. And decades later, people are still talking about this road, still daring friends to drive it, still asking what actually lives back there. But despite all the stories, there's no verified evidence that the infamous hidden colony described in the legend does exist. And even the people whose accounts were collected often said that they didn't really believe it, except one of them would ask whether she'd actually go down there. She said no. And that's why this story is so great, because she knew it was probably folklore. She knew the stories when she was growing up. She knew what she was being told. She knew people drove out there and came home, and still, when somebody suggested, would you go? She said no. Because logic works really well at noon. At midnight, on an unfamiliar road, after somebody has spent 20 minutes telling you what's supposed to be waiting at the end, logic starts to get a little quieter. So if you ever find yourself driving through the hills outside San Jose and somebody in the car says, hey, this is Hicks Road, just remember, nobody has ever proved this legend, but generations of people around San Jose have kept telling it forever, and sometimes that's all this road needs.